Hello, Matthew Bell with InsurancePrescription.com, and today I wanted to talk about the Rule of 72. So the Rule of 72 is basically a heuristic device. That is to say, it's kind of a rule of thumb. It's not going to give you precise answers, but it can be a very helpful, rough estimator of a couple of different things that are particularly useful when you're thinking about various aspects of financial planning, retirement planning, and other things along the lines of that. Now, there's actually three very similar uses that it can be put to, and I'll sort of state what they are. The first one is going to be, it is going to help you to estimate the number of years that it would take to double an investment given a particular rate of return. Second, and sort of the corollary to that, alternatively, given a particular amount and a particular length of time, you can determine what the rate of return was that doubled a certain investment in a given amount of time. So that's a very similar calculation. And then again, similarly, it can be used to estimate the amount of time it would take prices to double given a particular rate of inflation. Now, the primary uses for the Rule of 72 in terms of estimating the amount of time it would take an investment to double are going to be helpful when you're doing retirement planning to try to determine how you're doing in terms of your asset accumulation strategy. With respect to inflation calculation, it can be very helpful to sort of estimate the risk to your portfolio 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road. In other words, given that you have a certain amount of income secured for yourself, let's say at the age of 65, how well situated will you be at the age of 85, 20 years down the road? How high would inflation have to be before you have to start being concerned that the amount of income and assets that you have for your retirement are not going to be enough to sustain you through the inflation that we might get? I am no expert, just as a disclaimer. I do not have a degree in economics, or I don't have a business degree or a mathematics degree. This is all a layman's perspective. I'm simply commenting on things that I have researched, find interesting, and think might be of value to some other people. According to Investopedia's article on how to define the Rule of 72, they state that it is a fairly accurate way of judging most rates of return. They give a kind of a table where they show what the disparity is between what the Rule of 72 estimates will be the time it takes for an investment to double and what mathematically is actually the accurate answer based on a compound rate of return. You can see that the variation for most of the interest rates that is assessed is around 1%, 2%, or even less than that. It's a pretty good estimator, does a good job, and for most practical purposes it's going to be enough to use the Rule of 72 instead of having to do more complicated mathematical calculations. So I thought we would work through just a couple of examples here. So example number one, looking at the number of years it takes to double a particular amount of money given a particular rate of return. Very simple calculation. We can take 72 and divide it by the rate of return, and then we would get an estimate for the number of years it would take for that investment to double. So if we think about a hypothetical 3% rate of return, 72 divided by 3 gives us 24 years. So the estimate for how long it would take your money to double given a compound annual rate of return of 3% would be approximately 24 years. If we have the slightly higher rate of return, 8%, 72 divided by 8% then yields 9 years as an estimate for how long it would take a given amount of money to double given an 8% rate of return. And finally, I've gone over this one in other videos, but the S&P averages approximately 10%. If we treat that as a compound rate of return for the time being here, it isn't a compound rate of return, and I have an entire video where I talk about the difference between an arithmetic average rate of return and a compound annual growth rate. But if we treat the S&P average as a compound rate of return, then we would take 72 divided by 10, and we would see that it would take approximately 7.2 years to double your money if you could get a 10% compound every year rate of return. Similarly, we can also perform a calculation to determine what the rate of return is if we know the amount of time it's taken for an investment to double. So let's suppose that we knew that an investment doubled in 10 years. Well, we would take the initial equation, 72 divided by, and then that would be the rate of return, equals the number of years. So it would be 72 divided by the unknown, here would be x. 72 divided by x equals 10 years. And then there are a couple of ways that we can proceed. On the one hand, we can multiply x to both sides. We would then remove the x from 72 divided by x, x over x becomes 1, and then we'd have 10x. At that point, we can divide both sides by 10, which gives us 72 divided by 10 is 7.2. So the rate of return, given a 10-year time period of doubling, would be 7.2% approximately. On the other hand, we can set up an equation and cross-multiply. So let's suppose that we knew that an investment would double in 28 years. We'd have 72 divided by x equals 28 years, but we could represent 28 years as 28 over 1. Cross-multiplying, we would get 72 times 1 and 28x, and then we would divide both sides by 28, giving us 72 divided by 28 for x, which is approximately 2.57. Now that's telling us that if we knew that an investment doubled in 28 years, we could engineer the rate of return at around 2.57. Now the third calculation is the inflation rate. So when you know what the rate of inflation is, you can estimate approximately how long it would take for prices to double. So this is an interesting alternative application for the rule of 72, since in the first place we've been looking at a positive thing, right? Given a particular rate of return, how long will it take for you to double your money, your investment, your asset, whatever it is? But in this case, we're actually looking at it as a negative. If we use the rule of 72 with an inflation rate, then we can actually estimate how long it would take for prices to double. So in 2018, according to a Google search, I actually got two numbers here, two different estimates for the inflation rate. One was 2.44 and one was 1.9. Using the rule of 72, taking 2.44 as an inflation rate first, we would just take 72 divided by 2.44, and we would get 29.51 approximately. Alternatively, if we used 1.9, we would simply take 72 divided by 1.9, and that would give us 37.89. Realize that what we're talking about here is if the inflation rate hovers around 2%, then in 36 years prices would double. One important calculation would be what is the average inflation rate that is obtained over the time period that this kind of thing has been tracked. And the answer, according to inflationdata.com, is 3.22%. So if we take the average amount of inflation that's obtained throughout the history of the tracking of inflation rate, we get 72 divided by 3.22 equals 22.36 years. So in approximately 20-something years, prices are expected to double given the historical average. Now there are many questions about these numbers. There are economists that believe that the inflation rate is higher, reported as higher than it should be. Many economists believe that it is lower. Some who allege that it's being suppressed, in part because of pressures with respect to the cost of living adjustments performed by Social Security. If the inflation rate were admitted to be higher, they think then the Social Security Administration would be in even greater trouble than it is based on projections in terms of how many benefits it would need to pay out. But those kinds of questions aside, these are just rough and ready estimates. Now, on the other hand, we can look at some of the historical low and high numbers. Ignoring negative inflation, in 1929, I saw on the table that I consulted a 0.6 inflation rate. So again, 72 divided by 0.6 would be 120 years. And then on the higher end, inflation rates in the 1970s hit double digits. So for instance, in 1976, the inflation rate was reported here to be 13.3. So that would be 72 divided by 13.3, gives us 5.41 years. That's crazy. Every 5 years, basically the prices double. And it was worse than that around the time of the aftermath of World War II. In 1946, the inflation rate was reported as 18.1, which would literally give you 72 divided by 18.1, 3.98 years. So in less than 4 years, prices would double. Now, once again, there are questions about the accuracy of these numbers. I'm simply illustrating, really here, this is not a video about inflation. This is simply a video about the uses of the rule of 72. If something that I said was of value to you, if you found it interesting, please like the video, please subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell to be alerted to new content as it becomes available. I thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again in another video.